Welcome to the podcast today, where we celebrate innovation for a happy planet. I am your host, Abigail Carroll. This podcast marks our 30th episode, which seems like something to celebrate. So thank you for tuning in. And if you like what we're doing, please spread the word. We have traveled the world on this podcast, but today's guest is located right here where I am in the great state of Maine. Stuart Davies joins us today to speak about ORPC, or the Ocean Renewable Power Company. They are building modern modular hydropower units fit for rivers and oceans. Unlike traditional hydropower, these units are mobile and they do not disturb the local ecosystem. Compared to solar and wind, hydropower also has the advantage of providing baseload energy, as it is not dependent on a specific set of circumstances to perform. Let's hear it from Stuart. Welcome to the podcast, Stuart. I'm so happy to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So you are a Maine company. You're innovating in the hydropower space. Tell me a little bit about what ORPC is doing today.
So ORPC, or the Ocean Renewable Power Company, we were founded in 2004. As you said, we're based in Portland, Maine. We have 40 employees. We also have offices in Canada, Ireland, and have a couple people in Seattle and Alaska. And then we have an affiliate in Patagonia, Chile. And what we do is our devices generate electricity from moving water. So we deploy those devices in rivers and places where there's fast-moving tidal streams, and we convert that kinetic energy into highly predictable baseload renewable energy.
Can you just clarify what baseload resources means?
Baseload, if you think about a coal-fired generator or a natural gas generator, you can turn those on and run those 24/7, 365, right? Obviously, they'll be down a few days a year for maintenance, but that's just giving highly predictable electrons to the grid at all times. Intermittent renewables are more like solar or wind. When we're in nighttime or a cloudy day, solar's not going to produce electricity. On a sunny day, it's going to produce. So that can change minute to minute. Same with wind. We can have gusts of wind and then the wind can stop. So these are cheaper sources of electricity, but they're also add a lot of complexity to the grid. So for example, you've seen electricity prices double over the last 10 years in the US, despite us putting all these low-cost renewables, because it's all the distribution and the complexity around handling that at the grid that's added all the cost to the grid here in the last decade. So by adding in more baseload into that mix, we can lower the requirements for batteries. We can have these intermittent renewables handle more peak loads and really lower the overall cost, improve the resiliency and reliability of the grid.
Also, you have an ocean product, right? This will work in the ocean, or some of your systems will work in the ocean.
That's right. And not all places along the coast have tidal resources, but there's also wave energy that's also can play a role there along the coast. But the tidal energy market globally is an enormous opportunity. For example, there's enough river and tidal energy in the US to power 30 million homes. An analysis done by the EU is they're anticipating having up to 10% of their electricity from tidal energy by 2050. Globally, that industry could be as much as $50 billion a year.
Wow.
Just to give you an idea, that's about the size of the North American used truck market. So it's a huge market opportunity.
We are all using water-based energy 100 years ago, and it seems to have come back, but with some different bells and whistles. How is the water-generated power today different than what we had 100 years ago?
What you have 100 years ago still probably represents over half the renewable energy that we generate in the United States is what's called traditional hydropower. What we're doing is hydrokinetic energy. So it's different. Traditional hydropower, they build permanent structures to generate electricity, which permanently alters the course of a river. Very hard to get those permitted today, just given the impact on migration of fish, et cetera. What ORPC's devices do is we generate electricity from free-flowing water. So we don't use any dams or impoundments. Our devices are easily removed from the water, so there's nothing permanent about them.
Right. I mean, they actually look like pontoons. Your first product looks like a pontoon that's just two big, long buoys.
Our turbine sits on a pontoon, and the pontoons fill with water, and it lowers to the bottom of a river or a shallow tidal location. And then we release the brake, and the water passing by in the river just rotates that turbine, which turns a generator. And then we have a power and data cable that brings the electricity to shore.
And how is it managed? I mean, is there any management of this product once it's in the water?
Yeah, so we can slow the device down, we can speed it up, we have a brake, we can stop it. All of that is controlled through the power and data cable.
And why would one slow it down?
Well, for example, when we're operating in a microgrid, we might be generating too much electricity for the load. Let's say at 2 in the morning, there might not be much demand for electricity. So we can slow it down and provide the right amount of electricity for the community.
And is there a scenario where you would connect a battery to this type of solution to store electricity?
We can operate without batteries or with batteries. We're operating in a community called Iggyagig, Alaska, which is a remote village about 250 miles southwest of Alaska, where we started off by providing power directly to the grid. We're in the second phase of that project right now. The village of Iggyagig installed a battery and a smart microgrid controller from Schneider Electric. And then we've worked with Schneider Electric to integrate our smart microgrid and our RivGen power systems. So we'll be installing our second unit here later this summer. And when that project is completed, Schneider's equipment and our equipment will form the grid for the community and move the diesel generators into a backup role. And that'll enable the community to operate off diesels between 60 and 90% of the time. When the demand is higher than what our RivGens are producing, the batteries will provide additional electricity to the community. When the load is lower, we'll just charge the battery.
What would the load really look like with one of those units in terms of households?
The community of Iggyagig is about 70 people, and 2 of our devices can basically meet the demand for that community.
But they're probably historically lower demand than a suburban neighborhood in New England might be.
Yeah, that's correct. They probably use 60, 70% of the electricity of a typical American household.
So your market is really coastal or river-bound communities that are sort of off the beaten track, right?
We think there's a lot of use cases along major rivers in the US, but our initial markets, what we've been targeting, have been to replace diesel generators in communities. For example, we're working on a project in the Mississippi River now to provide electricity to electrify a facility that's along the river.
And in a case like that, where there's a lot of usage in one specific space, would they have to go through the grid or would they just connect to your unit and get direct electricity?
We don't need any poles and wires. We can connect right into the port facility, or in the case of Iggyagig, right into the community's grid.
That's really cool. And what kind of permitting do you need?
There's still a variety of permits in Iggyagig. We're working with all the environmental and regulatory agencies. If you're in any sort of waterway, you need a FERC permit. And so we work with local, state, and federal regulators to put all the permits in place.
And is that a long process?
It can be. Hopefully, I know in Washington, D.C. right now, they're talking about permitting reform. I think there's some changes in the legislation that would be helpful to all renewables, not just ours. But yeah, there's a pretty extensive permitting process.
Well, it seems like there's goodwill in DC right now to move in this direction of renewables. Your instrument is in the water and there's fish in the water. There's whole ecosystems in the water. How does your system relate to those existing ecosystems?
It's one of the reasons we were excited to work with the community of Iggyagig, Alaska. The Kvichak River there is one of the largest sockeye salmon runs in North America. So in a 10-day stretch, every year between 4 and 5.5 million adult sockeye salmon pass by our device.
Wow.
Several weeks before that, about 40 to 75 million 2-year-old smolt come down the river out of the lake upstream and pass by our device. So we've literally had hundreds of millions of fish pass by our device. No recorded fish injuries or fish mortalities. If you look at our device, if you think about adult fish coming up a river, we're in the strongest flow. So if you're swimming upstream, you really don't want to be in that strong currents. We actually have cameras on the device. We've worked with Alaska Fish and Game. They put drop cameras, have people on vessels in the river using drop cameras. Then we had drones up above. It's very clear water. You can see all of the adult fish migrating. And so again, no recorded fish injuries or fish mortalities. And our device rotates at about 10 miles an hour. So it's a very slow moving. It only takes up about 4% of the capture area as it's rotating. So there's a lot of open space even within it.
Interesting.
Just to give your listeners a sense, the largest wind turbine, its tips as they're spinning around are probably moving at 200 to 250 miles an hour. And we're moving at about 10 miles an hour.
Very interesting. So why can you make so much electricity going so relatively slowly?
Water is 800 times the density of air. That helps, so you don't need as big a rotor.
Just more force?
Yeah, think if you get hit by a 30-mile-an-hour wind versus a big wave, the wave packs a lot more punch.
Interesting. How are the remote communities responding to this? Are they excited? Is this helping them? Is this adhering to their community values? What is your impact, do you think, on these communities?
We're just getting started and starting to expand it and tell our story, but I think there's been a huge positive reaction. And I think it's because our system can be a total long-term solution for the community. It's a powerful tool because it's a highly predictable baseload renewable energy source. If you're a tidal community, tides are as predictable as the tides, right? We know what the tides are going to be every hour and every minute of every day for the next 100 years. So we know exactly how much electricity one of our systems could produce. And rivers run every day. While there may be some seasonality to them, those flow conditions are highly predictable longer term over a band. And then in the short term, it's not like water levels in a river drop in half overnight. So it's very predictable what the electricity is going to be. So that enables these communities to put us in as a foundational baseload renewable energy source.
That's amazing. And you mentioned tidal streams. Do these devices work in both directions?
They do, yes.
And the one we're talking about with the pontoons, this is one of several products that you have launched today, correct?
That's correct. So our tidal devices actually, think of those pontoons being flipped upside down. So the turbine actually hangs underneath the pontoon so we can fill those ballast tanks with the right air-water mix to target the right depth in the ocean we need to, one, get the most powerful tidal streams, the movement of water, but also, we want to be below vessel traffic and not have any sightline profiles in the water.
And is that an issue for permitting the sightline?
It hasn't been, but we just think if you're looking out into a beautiful harbor and you have 100 boats in it, it's great. If you have 100 wind turbines in it, it tends to have resistance. So we've tried to keep our profile below the water. And there's a lot of weather at the surface, storms and debris, as well as vessel traffic. So we believe the right answer is to be submerged.
Interesting. So there's a lot of people starting wind farms and solar farms. Could somebody start a hydropower farm using your tools?
They could. Right now, the industry is at that point. We're crossing that threshold where developers are going to start looking at building projects at scale. We're in our 4th year of operation in Igigagig. Some of our competitors in Europe have been operating in the ocean for some 3 years, some as much as 5 years. So we're getting the credibility around the reliability and performance of the systems and starting to drive down our costs as an industry. It really feels like the momentum is building for the industry.
Watch out, power companies. They're going to have a whole new set of people coming in and interconnecting in their grids.
I think they'd be happy to see us because, again, it's base load. There's a lot of complexity into a grid when you add intermittent renewables like wind and solar, when you know exactly how many electrons you're going to get at every minute and every hour of the day. It's base load, and that's really what the world's looking for.
It's interesting because I'm down in Maine, and I'm in a little coastal community, which is a peninsula, and we've got a massive tidal current between our inner harbor, which is a great estuary, and a nearshore harbor. I keep thinking, this would be a great place for one of your units because the tidal flow there is pretty outrageously fast. What would be the first steps that I would do to try to figure that out and assess the doability?
Go to orpc.co and find an interest form you can fill out and send in the location. We'll follow up with you, and we can do some desktop studies to understand what the resource and water depths are and whether some of our devices would work at that location.
After a short break, we'll talk about the future for renewables and for ORPC around the globe. A big thanks to the Maine Technology Institute, MTI, investing in innovation for a prosperous Maine. MTI is Maine's unique public-private partnership whose core mission is to diversify and grow Maine's economy by accelerating innovation in the state's targeted technology sectors. MTI offers grants, loans, equity investments, and services to support Maine entrepreneurs and organizations as they transform their innovative ideas into new products, services, and companies, leading to the creation of quality jobs for Maine people. For more information about MTI and its programs, please visit mainetechnology.org. For a blue economy to thrive, people need to use more sustainable products. But which products? And will consumers actually adopt them? Innovators like you are hustling to figure this out. Spark number 9 can tell you if there's demand for your product. Spark markets your product before it's built,
using online advertising so you launch smarter. Have a big idea? Vet it with Spark before you build. Visit Spark online at www.sparkno9.com or find them on LinkedIn.
Welcome back to Happy Planet.
We've got a big shift, and we're hearing a lot about it from the Biden administration. Our whole energy ecosystem is shifting towards renewables. I'm really interested. How do you see this shift manifesting? I mean, it's already happening. Where are we in the shift, and where is it going?
From my perspective, I mean, I think we're still in the early stages. We're beginning to have the realizations about how difficult some of this will be. We're starting to see permitting blocks, roadblocks we're seeing and causing queuing for renewables to be deployed. We're seeing supply chain issues. We're also starting to have end of life issues for some of the early stage deployments. So some of the initial solar panels are running into the end of their useful life and starting to fill up landfills. So all of that is having to be absorbed and dealt with by the community. But I do think we're still going in a very positive direction, and I expect that to accelerate. From my perspective, to get to a net zero, we need to add more baseload resources to the energy mix. I think everybody is very focused on solar and wind and batteries. You know, you see the supply chain issues with having enough copper or enough graphite to handle all the needs for all these batteries to go into EVs, as well as supply to the grid. We're seeing shortages in transformers. So adding a mixture of baseload resources to this renewable energy mix will be really important for us.
It's really interesting. So how did ORPC get started?
There were three founders. The company in 2004 started in Florida, trying to take advantage. So there's rivers, there's tidal energies, and then there's ocean currents like the Gulf Stream. So a portion of the Gulf Stream actually goes up along the east coast of Florida, and it's a pretty robust current. So you basically have this underwater river in the ocean there. The original founders were trying to build devices to tap into that 24/7 electricity source. That shifted toward more tidal energy, and two of the founders exited the business, and Chris Sauer really took it forward from there and built a team, moved the company to Maine. We focused on tidal energy, had several deployments between 2009 and 2014, and then really we shifted our focus to rivers for the last decade and really built our RivGen power system for these remote community markets, and are now rolling that out globally, and also a new device based on the same principles for lower 48 applications like the Mississippi River. And then we recently deployed our next generation tidal device off the coast of Maine. So we're back in the ocean after a decade of being in the rivers.
That's great. Sometimes things need to go full circle like that. Where do you see the most demand going forward?
You know, there's several opportunities. So we talked about that $50 billion market and the grid for tidal. We see in the lower 48 and the developed world a role for our devices to play in the EV charging solutions. So if you look at the Department of Transportation in the US, for example, they're trying to put EV chargers every 50 miles along major US highways and interstates. A lot of those interstates and highways are built along major rivers: Mississippi River, Missouri River, Yellowstone River, North Platte River, Columbia, Snake, et cetera. So there's a real opportunity, we believe, to power EV charging using those river resources. And so that really wouldn't even need to connect to the grid. So if you think about the hundreds of miles, you know, between the Appalachian Mountains and the West Coast, there's a lot of river resources there where there's not a great solution. It would require hundreds of miles of poles and wires to build out these EV charging. So we think that's an opportunity. And then for our RivGen power system, 700 million people currently in the world live on diesel generators. There's about another 700 million people at least that don't have access to any electricity at all. So replacing diesel generators with our devices results in as much as a 98% reduction in CO2 emissions. You know, before we even get into the tidal energy market or this EV charging market, we think we have a huge market opportunity. We're lower cost than diesel, and we're a renewable energy source.
So some of these remote communities that may not have enough or any electricity, are there grant programs for them that they could tap into to install a system like yours?
There are. So there's programs under a lot of aid agencies in addition to government agencies. But focusing on the U.S., the Department of Energy has an Indian Energy Office. They have grant programs that are available. The Department of Energy recently created an Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. That's $21 billion that'll be spent over the next 5 years. They have a number of grant programs where they're looking to help both rural, tribal, and remote communities with grant funding to do projects like this. The Loan Program Office within the DOE has a specific program for rural and remote and tribal programs. And then the U.S. Department of Agriculture also has a series of programs.
So you're operating, though, on 3 continents, which is pretty impressive. Are you finding different support for this product in different areas or just renewables in general? Like the climate in Chile and Europe, is it different than here?
I'd say Chile is very forward thinking about making this energy transition, as are Europe and the US. So we've had outreach from over 50 countries. We had a conversation last week with a group in Nigeria. Their electricity is unreliable. I think 10 to 15% of the population has electricity, and that electricity is unreliable. So as they think about electrifying, they obviously have a lot of natural gas resources, but there's a lot of moving water in countries like Nigeria, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Those countries also are looking for resources and looking at renewable resources. And I think their energy grids will be created similar to how they did their cellular. Like they just bypassed building that landlines. I don't think it makes sense for a lot of those countries to put the poles and wires in. You can do local microgrids on a community by community basis and put our systems in where there's river resources and maybe augment that with solar or wind and some batteries, and really just build a series of microgrids that are going to be more resilient and more reliable.
So where are you making all these products?
We have mostly a U.S. supply chain. I think between 75 and 80% of our content is U.S. We do our assembly mostly in Maine.
So where are you guys in terms of your corporate growth? Are you fundraising right now?
In terms of fundraising, we raised a $25 million round in 2021. That was led by a venture capital firm called Canadian Shield Capital based in Toronto. They're focused on the energy transition. They have a series of LPs. A number of them are large corporations. One of those companies is a company called Hatch, which is a global engineering firm that's also based in the Toronto area. They have operations in about 50 countries. They do a lot with remote communities, remote mining, and then working with grids in many countries. They have a port business. So they do a lot of work around the ocean and along rivers, and they really understood our market opportunity and were excited to move forward with us. You know, that being said, I'm a CEO of a fast-growing company, and with my mindset, we're always kind of raising capital. I'm always happy to talk to investors who are interested in our story, and I think our owners are always happy to bring in the right partners to our mix.
It just sounds like an incredible opportunity. Are you optimistic about the future of us getting to this net zero place that we're all talking about today?
So, generally, I'm an optimist. I think people always underestimate the pace of innovation. If you think about the iPhone, for example, no one ever predicted how fast the market would adopt that. I would say the same with the cost of a solar panel. That came down 80 to 90% over the last decade. I don't think people would have envisioned all the innovation that went in, both from the supply chain as well as the solar manufacturers, as well as the installers. We're seeing the same thing in our devices. The last device deployed, we did it in less than 90 minutes.
Wow.
The first one took, weeks to do. So we're getting smarter about how to prep a site and get ready for a deployment. Same with some of our components. We're seeing 70, 80% cost reductions as we work with our supply chain to innovate. So I envision, that's happening across a number of renewables. So I'm optimistic that we're going to find that solution. But I do think to stay ahead of the climate pressures, obviously I'm biased, but my view is there's too much focus on wind and solar. If you look at even the most optimistic models about us getting to net zero by 2050, there's always this 20 to 30% hole in the energy mix, which is future innovation or future technology. So as we're thinking about allocating capital to different sectors or tax incentives to different sectors, we have to keep that in mind as a country and as the developing world of setting policies that enable this innovation and don't crowd it out.
Right. Do you have any advice today for entrepreneurs that are climate driven?
It's hard, difficult work. Building a business that's making a device that, is going to work for 20 years and do so efficiently and effectively is difficult work. But I know there's other entrepreneurs that probably are feeling this the same. I feel like every 2 or 3 successes we have some sort of setback. And so I guess my advice is what we've done at ORPC, which is to hire smart, dedicated people, that are excited about your mission. They just work the problems every day and come up with great innovations. The other thing that advice I give is you also have little successes along the way and make sure and celebrate those because there are some major accomplishments. So 2 weeks ago, we deployed our first tidal device in 10 years, and it's our next generation. And there's a lot of work to still be done around that. And we have some other projects going. So everyone's really busy, but you got to stop for a moment and everyone just kind of celebrate what a major accomplishment that was for the company.
Well, congratulations on that. It also seems like you've been fairly good as a team and actually like following the market. You had an idea, but you had to pivot a little bit to hit the current need of your client. And now you've been able to come back to the original thesis. That seems like a very good lesson.
And I think part of that is as our business development team has been out in the market, there's more and more use cases that develop, right? So EV charging was probably not on our radar screen 3 years ago. We're having conversations with state energy offices and communities about, for example, if you're 100% renewable grid, what happens in a tornado or a hurricane? How do we keep wastewater treatment plants running? Or how do we keep intensive care units running? You need that baseload, always on renewable energy source in that mix. And so we're seeing more and more use cases for our product, and we're trying to adapt our product to the market. All of our core technology is the same in the 3 products that I talked about. And so we're taking the automotive approach. We have our SUV, we built a minivan for the tidal market, and we built a sedan for, I call it our solar panel, where we can do 20 unit arrays every couple hundred yards and build these multi-100 unit arrays.
That's exciting. And I'm very proud that you guys are a Maine company now. I want to get one of these in Biddeford Pool, get the whole community off the grid.
Thank you, Stuart, for joining us today on this 30th episode of Happy Planet. ORPC exemplifies the kind of innovation that I love to talk about on this show. It has real power to improve the lives of people and the health of the planet. We're going to take a quick break for the 4th of July holiday, but when we come back, we will continue to bring you stories from creative innovators seeking to make the Earth a happy planet. Thanks for tuning in. Please follow Happy Planet wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It really does help new listeners discover the show. It's exciting to me to have made 30 episodes, and I'm so happy to have had you with me on this incredibly fun journey. Happy Planet was reported and hosted by me. I am also the executive producer. The talented Dylan Hoyer is our producer and editor, and composer George Brandel Egloff created our theme music. Learn more about my work and get in touch by visiting happyplanetpodcast.com.